So it must be warmer outside today. The cat's even outside. A lot less wind as well. No reefs today. And it's Tuesday, so it must be Barton or bust. Could be a great day sailing out on Barton today. How's your day going? Have you taken part in the daily challenge yet? Built your boat? I've got 1 or 2 I'm working on. Maybe even 3 or 4. So you'll see the videos of those when I submit them. Also, don't forget the other things. We're still looking for cake entries from Saturday or logs. If you don't feel like doing a log on your own, why not to get together in a group and see if you can do one with a few other people. I'm sure we can potentially help with that, or maybe even talk to your cabin club. Maybe your cabin club want to think about doing a log as opposed to it being your crew. So there's a couple of ideas. And knots, don't be put off by those clever skippers and mates doing their knots really quickly, fancy people. Have a go yourself and tell us what your time is, because there will be a prize for the best non-skipper or mate time, and also the best non-skipper or mate effort. If you can send us a picture of something that you've done, that'd be really good. So evening quarters then. What have we got in store tonight? Well, back to our theme. If you want to walk on water, you have got to get out of the boat. So tonight we're talking about being on water. Thinking about actually walking on water and what it might have been like.
So there came a point when Peter is actually walking on the water. He's doing it. He's walking with Jesus on the water, and it's amazing. But then things start to go wrong. We hear about him looking at the wind and the waves, and he starts to realize how scary it is and how big it is, and he starts to sink. And Jesus has to lift him out of the water again, because he stopped focusing on Jesus and he's focusing instead on the challenge of it all, on how big it is, on how scary it is, on the storm, about the wind and the waves. And he thinks, I can't do this. But it was never about him being able to do it, and he stopped focusing on the one who's helping him, Jesus, and he's focusing on the one who can't do it, himself. We have to choose where we're going to look. Peter had to choose where he was going to look, at Jesus or at the storm, at himself or at the one who could help him, even though he wasn't able. There's a choice about where we look and where we put our trust and where we put our attention. Peter had to make that choice, and so do we. Do we look at the storms and the big scary things, or at Jesus, the one who can help us in the middle of the storm?
For our worship this evening, we'd like you to spend a bit of time thinking about how you spend your day and how you fill your time. Now, right now doesn't look like normal life looks. So make a decision whether you want to focus on how you're spending your time right now, or how your day usually looks like. It's up to you. What we'd like you to do first is draw a circle on a piece of paper, and then divide that circle into sections depending on how much time you spend doing each activity. I've got an example here. Might look something a bit like that. Once you've done that, take a few minutes to think about how God fits into your day, and think about where you could spend more time with him. And also think about how God fits into the things you do every day, how you can worship him in the things you do every day.
cynical amongst you might assume I was using a chainsaw at the start of this video just to give John, our technical guy, a real headache. But I've been cutting down a hedge over the past 2 weeks. It's made me think about chainsaws quite a lot. They can be quite dangerous. If you have no fear of them, you can end up doing something stupid, cutting into your own leg. But if you fear them too much, you get all stiff, you can't react if the chainsaw hits something and jerks, and you can end up in just as much trouble. Anyway, I'm going somewhere quieter for the rest of the video. Hopefully this is easier, John. A few years ago, many years ago, my brother, myself, and 2 cousins with my dad went from Harwich to Hook in Holland on a ferry. And the weather was due to be rough, but the storm got up unexpectedly partway through the journey and things went downhill. We couldn't turn around because we were sailing or motoring into the teeth of the gale, and to turn around would put the ship broadside onto the waves. It was far more dangerous. And the ship was rising and falling on the waves. They'd locked the outside doors on the lower decks because they were a couple of feet underwater at various times. Every so often, the note of the engines would change as the propellers beat furiously in the air rather than in the water. And then the ship would sink down and down and down with that stomach-churning feeling as gravity disappears before it hit the bottom with a massive crash and then surged up and up and up, and you felt like you were twice as heavy as you are normally. Most people were lying down praying for it all to be over. But my cousins and myself had been allowed to go exploring earlier in the evening, and we were having an amazing time. We played something we called the stair game, where if you stood at the bottom of a staircase and timed things right, and jumped just as the ship started to drop, you could clear the entire flight of stairs in one jump. Do not try this at home. We also watched as a few intrepid other passengers would walk down corridors, and as the ship surged upwards, the less able of them would be flattened onto the floor. And then just as quickly as the ship dropped away again, they would find themselves back up somewhere near their feet. We explored every inch of the ship. We went out onto the top deck and got sprayed by the sea. We went as low down as we could and got as close to the engines as we were allowed, and heard them beating and desperately trying to get us forwards. We were not at all worried. And what sort of thing turned what could have been a real nightmare situation into something so fun? And it really was quite dangerous. Only 2 years later, a ferry would capsize in the North Sea and 200 people died. But we weren't focusing on the danger. I was focused on the fun that I was having, on the people that I was with, and the danger didn't even enter my mind. Now, the disciples were on a rather different boat to the massive ferry that we were on. Their boat was about 27 feet long, about the length of the boat that we sail on the Broads. And it was probably about a metre from the water to the top of the boat. And the storms in the Sea of Galilee can get quite fierce. They've recorded waves 3 metres high, which, if you're in a boat that's only a metre high, is quite a big wave. And we know that they were fighting against the wind. It says so in the passage. We know that they must have been working really hard. And so when Jesus came along and they thought it was a ghost, it was no surprise that they cried out in fear. They were probably already slightly worried about what was going to happen anyway. Nonetheless, Peter sees Jesus and he forgets all about that sort of thing, and he says, "Call me out on the water." So Jesus does. And you know, as Peter
sets out of the boat, those first few steps, I don't think he was worried. Doesn't say anything about it in the Bible, but I guess it was all suddenly new and exciting, and there was a chance to go and see Jesus, who he had no doubt expected not to see for a few days. Or maybe he was just having to keep his eyes on Jesus so that he could keep knowing where to go. If you've ever done man overboard drill, you'll know that we put a lookout who's going to keep pointing at the man overboard so everybody else doesn't need to. But they do that because it's so easy to lose somebody in the water. Maybe Peter was thinking about that, keeping his eyes fixed on Jesus just so that he could still see him. But at some point, Peter no longer felt the need to look at Jesus, or was distracted by the wind and the waves around him. Whatever it was, whatever triggered that, once he saw the wind and the waves, he was properly distracted. It began to sink in that he couldn't walk on water. And so he suddenly couldn't walk on water, and he begins to sink. Peter's not the only person to get distracted. It's often said that in Christianity, it doesn't matter where we stand, it's where we're looking that matters. That it's all about walking towards Jesus rather than how far you are from him. But I don't know if you've ever seen a labyrinth. No, not the one with the Minotaur in Crete, one more like this. They've been drawn for thousands of years, and they are often found in abbeys or monasteries or retreat centres where they are etched into the floor. The idea is that you follow the path. If you look, there is only one way from the edge to the middle. It's not a maze, you can't get lost. And they're supposed to allow you to reflect on how life is going. You follow the path, but the path also represents a bit about life. And you'll notice that as you go through the labyrinth, you may get closer to Jesus, and then you may turn around and walk away. And I always find it really heartening that actually it's often the point when you get very furthest from the centre that you are right about to get there. If you look up in the top right-hand side, you'll see that outer path comes right round the outside edge as far as it'll go, and then heads almost directly to the centre. And that's exactly what happens to Peter. At that point, when he seems to have turned away from Jesus, got distracted, isn't looking at him, something else, in this case, his awareness, triggers him to look back, to cry out in fear. As soon as he does that, as soon as he cries out, there Jesus is. And with a touch, they are back together. And they walk back to the boat. Now, Peter was distracted by fear, but there's many other things that we can be distracted by. Maybe you're distracted by stress. Maybe the isolation of the current situations is making it difficult to see Jesus. Maybe you're distracted by success. Maybe you're doing so well at life you don't need God. Maybe you're distracted by money, by not having enough, or by having too much so that you don't feel like you need anything else at all. Or maybe you're distracted by that beautiful person that you see on the walk to school every day but have never quite managed to talk to. Whatever it is, I think the battle to not be distracted by the world is lost. I think we are far better off asking God for help to turn around, to notice when we are pointing in the wrong direction and change our path back towards him. Not to try and keep focused on him, but to keep refocusing on him. going to pray now, and then we're going to have some worship. God, I just pray for all of us that you will help us to spot when we are not looking at you, when the world has got in the way. Pray that you'll help us to turn back towards you and keep our eyes on Jesus. Amen.
Son was dead, the Saviour of the world was fallen. His body on the cross, His blood poured out for us, the weight of every curse upon Him. One final breath He gave as heaven looked away. The Son of God was laid in darkness. Battle in the grave, war on death waged. The power of hell forever broken. And the ground began to shake, the stones rolled away. His perfect love could not be overcome. Now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King has rendered you defeated, and forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He is alive. He is alive. And the ground began to shake, the stones rolled away. His perfect love could not be overcome. Now death, where is your sting? Our resurrected King has rendered you defeated, and forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He is alive. He is alive. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. The Lamb is overcome. We sing hallelujah. 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 The Lamb is overcome. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. We sing hallelujah. And forever He is glorified. Forever He is lifted high. Forever He is risen. He is alive. He is alive.
Earlier, I was talking all about distractions and how they can take us away from Jesus. But if you head over to Zoom in Clapping Clubs, we'll talk a bit more about this. See you in a minute.